in Mago Reddit. Today's story is
My wife cheated on me, took my children away from me, and convinced them that I abandoned them. 7 years later, the heartbreaking truth came out, and it changed everything. I had always believed that my marriage was built on solid foundations. Of course, like any couple, we had our difficult moments, but I genuinely thought that we could overcome any obstacle together. Until that day came that changed everything. It all started with a series of midnight text messages from a mutual acquaintance who had seen my wife walking hand in hand with another friend, confirming what I had long refused to accept. My wife had been unfaithful to me, and not just once but several times. It was not a simple momentary mistake, but a continuous pattern of cheating that destroyed the foundations of our relationship. Facing her was one of the hardest moments of my life. When I showed her the evidence, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she adopted a defensive stance, suggesting that my busy work schedule had pushed her to seek companionship elsewhere. It was a twisted way of transferring the blame, but I didn't fall for it. I explained to her that our marriage could not survive such a betrayal and, despite the deep pain, I filed for divorce. The legal proceedings were a real nightmare. She fought tooth and nail for custody of our children, claiming that I was emotionally distant and could not be a good father. Those words hurt me deeply because I had always tried to be there for my family, both emotionally and financially. In the end, the judge granted her primary custody, while I was given visiting rights. It felt like a double sentence for a heart that was already broken. After the divorce, I made a firm decision to remain present in my children's lives, although I knew it wouldn't be easy. At first, our communication was cordial. We organized schedules and I tried to make the most of every moment with them. I wanted to assure them that they weren't losing their father, even though our family dynamic had changed drastically. However, it wasn't long before problems started to appear. Subtle comments began to emerge during my children's visits. They asked me things like why I didn't want to spend time with them anymore, or why I had abandoned them to start another family. At first, I didn't understand where these ideas came from. I had never abandoned them, and I definitely didn't have another family. But as these comments became more direct, I began to understand the narrative that their mother was passing on to them. She had painted me as the villain of the story, the father who walked away from his responsibilities because he couldn't bear the pressure. According to her, I had chosen my freedom over my children, leaving her to pick up the pieces. It was a complete lie, but how could I expect young children to question the words of the parent they spent most of their time with? They were still too young to know the truth about the infidelity and everything that happened after. The manipulation wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it was subtle, seemingly casual comments about how difficult life was as a single mother or how she had to do everything by herself. Other times it was more direct. On one occasion, my daughter told me that she knew I didn't love them enough because I never fought harder to stay. Those words hurt me deeply. I tried to explain to her that I hadn't left by choice, but her mother's version had already taken root in her mind. Meanwhile, I worked hard to rebuild my life. I rented a modest apartment nearby so that I could be close to my children, and I made sure that our weekends together were filled with fun activities and quality time. But no matter how much effort I put in, I always felt like I was swimming against the tide. My ex, on the other hand, seemed determined to make my life impossible. She would accidentally forget to bring the children on time or schedule activities during my visiting hours, arguing that it was for their own good. If I protested, she accused me of being selfish and of not putting the children's needs first. It was a constant battle in which I always came out the loser. Over time, the emotional strain began to take its toll on me. My children, who had previously been affectionate and close, began to distance themselves. They stopped calling me dad and started using my first name, something that their mother actively encouraged. They would roll their eyes during our conversations or simply refuse to share any aspect of their lives with me. It was as if I was slowly losing them and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. I tried to communicate with my ex to address the problem, but each conversation ended in the same way. She claimed that I was imagining things and needed to accept the consequences of my own actions. It was extremely frustrating, but I didn't want to stoop to her level. I kept hoping that, as my children grew up, they would see through the lies and form their own opinions. The final blow came when I found out from a mutual friend that my ex had been spreading rumors about me in her social circle. She told several people that I had abandoned her and the children for a younger woman, a completely made-up story. I wasn't in any serious relationship at the time, but the damage was already done. My reputation was tarnished and I felt powerless to defend myself. Despite everything, I refused to give up. I continued to show up for my children even when they made it clear they didn't want me around. I thought that if I kept at it, they would eventually realize the truth, although deep down I knew that the more time that passed, the harder it would be to undo the damage. The distance between my children and me grew wider as the years went by. I watched them from afar, longing for the days when they would run into my arms after a long day at work. Now they barely looked at me, much less acknowledged my efforts. It was a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I couldn't abandon the hope that someday, when they were old enough, I could tell them the truth. Update 1. The change in my relationship with my children happened so suddenly that it took me by surprise. After years of feeling like a stranger to them, I had become accustomed to the cold and distant exchanges during our visits. I always harbored the hope that something would change, but I tried not to get my hopes up too much. One day, my son Carl called me unexpectedly, and seeing his name on my phone screen was such a big surprise that I almost thought it was a mistake. When I answered, his voice sounded calm, almost hesitant. He asked me if I could pick him up from school. He didn't give me much of an explanation, and I decided not to push him. I simply told him I would be there in 20 minutes. The car journey felt unreal, filled with a mixture of nervousness and cautious hope. Was it just a logistical problem, or was there something deeper behind this call? When we arrived, Carl was sitting alone on the school stairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked small and vulnerable, as if something were weighing him down. I called his name and he got up without a word, climbing into the passenger seat. The car ride was silent. I asked him if he wanted to talk, but he shook his head and said he just wanted to go home to my house, not to his mother's. That puzzled me, considering how eager he used to be to leave when our time together ended. When we arrived at my apartment, I offered him something to eat and we sat down in the living room. He finally spoke, asking me why I had left him and his sister. I had prepared myself mentally for such a question for years, but hearing it still hurt. I explained that I hadn't left them, but I had fought with all my might to remain in their lives. Carl didn't seem convinced. He told me that his mother had told them that I had abandoned the family because I didn't want to take responsibility. The anger I had been holding back for years threatened to overflow, but I managed to keep it under control. I told him that wasn't true and that it was time he knew the whole story. I explained that the divorce wasn't because I stopped loving him or his sister. I told him about his mother's infidelity, how she had betrayed me and left me with no choice but to end the marriage. I didn't sugarcoat the truth, but I didn't try to demonize her completely either. I explained that people make mistakes and sometimes those mistakes hurt the ones they love. Carl remained silent for a long moment, processing what I had just told him. I could see the conflict in his eyes. It was not easy for him to reconcile the version of events that his mother had instilled in him with the truth that I was now sharing with him. In the following weeks, Carl began to spend more time with me. He didn't tell his mother about our conversations, and neither did I mention it. I wasn't looking to provoke a confrontation. I just wanted to rebuild my relationship with my son. Little by little he opened up, asking more questions about the past. One night during dinner, he asked me why his mother had lied to them about what had happened. I told him I couldn't be sure. Perhaps she felt ashamed of her actions or didn't know how to explain them. Or maybe she had convinced herself that her version of events was true. Carl's questions made me wonder if Sia, my daughter, was also starting to put the pieces together. She was more reserved than Carl during our visits, but I noticed that she paid more attention to me. She didn't ask directly, but I could sense her curiosity. A real turning point came during a family gathering on my ex-wife's side. Although I wasn't there, I found out what happened later. Apparently, one of her relatives made a comment about me being an irresponsible father. To everyone's surprise, Carl intervened. He told them they didn't know the full story and shouldn't be so quick to judge. That moment marked a significant change. Carl was no longer just questioning his mother's narrative. He was defending me. It was a bittersweet feeling, knowing that my son had to defend me to a group of people who saw me as the villain. A few weeks later, Carl confronted his mother directly. She became defensive and enraged, accusing me of poisoning his mind. But Carl was not intimidated. He told her about the conversations we had had and asked her why she had lied about the divorce. Her reaction only strengthened Carl's determination to know the truth, and when she couldn't give him a clear explanation, he began to see her differently. It wasn't that he stopped loving her, but the blind trust he had placed in her words began to fade. Sia also started asking more questions. She wasn't as direct as Carl, but I could tell she was thinking about everything I had told them. During a visit, she asked me if I had ever wanted to abandon them. I told her the same thing I had told Carl. I never wanted to leave and I had always intended to be there for them at every stage of their lives. It wasn't easy to watch them face the truth. They were caught between loyalty to their mother and the realization that she hadn't been honest with them. I tried to reassure them that it was okay to love both parents, even if one of us had made mistakes. But the more the children learned, the more strained their relationship with their mother became. They started spending more time at my house, not out of obligation but because they wanted to. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly their father again. What I hadn't anticipated was how this change would affect my ex-wife. Her family, who had always been on her side, also began to question her. The truth has a way of making its way through even when someone tries to hide it. Update 2. Carl and Sia's decision to spend more time with me didn't just impact my ex-wife. It also had an unexpected effect on her support circle. But at that moment, my attention wasn't focused on her. As I mentioned before, it wasn't long before she noticed the growing distance between the children, and she didn't take it well at all. It started with small details. She started calling the children to her more often when they were with me. Her voice, loud enough through the speaker for me to hear the tension in her tone, would remind them of plans or responsibilities, subtly drawing them back to her. I didn't intervene, but I could see that this situation was confusing for them. One Friday night, Carl told me he didn't feel like going back to his mother's house yet. He explained that things were tense there, that she had been irritable since he confronted her about the infidelity. Sia agreed, adding that her mother seemed upset all the time but didn't explain why. I told them they didn't have to make any immediate decisions. Carl was almost 18 and Sia was 16. Legally, she couldn't stop them from spending more time at my house and staying over more often. However, I couldn't ignore the concern I felt. I knew my ex-wife well enough to know that she wasn't one to give up control easily. It didn't take her long to start sending me messages. At first they were polite, asking why the children were spending more time with me. I replied calmly, explaining that it was their decision and that I wasn't pressuring them to stay, but her messages quickly became accusatory. She accused me of manipulating the children, of turning them against her. She claimed that I was filling their heads with lies to make her look bad. I tried to reason with her, reminding her that the children deserved to know the truth. That only seemed to increase her anger. One night she called me directly. Her voice sounded tense, mixed with frustration and despair. She said that she had no right to tell the children about her infidelity, that it was a private matter and did not concern them. I replied that they were old enough to understand what had happened and that they deserved honesty. She didn't take it well. She accused me of ruining her relationship with the children, of destroying her family. I could hear the emotion in her voice, but I wasn't going to give in on this point. I told her that if she wanted to repair her relationship with them, she would have to start by taking responsibility for her actions. That conversation ended with her hanging up abruptly, and I knew this was far from over. The following week I started hearing rumors through mutual friends and family. She was telling people that I was brainwashing the children, feeding them lies to turn them against them. It was exhausting having to deal with this. As the days went by, the tension between the children and their mother increased. Carl began to avoid her calls and Sia became more withdrawn. I was told that she had been acting more erratically, going from being overly affectionate to angry in a matter of seconds. The final straw came during a weekend visit. Carl told me that his mother had shown him a letter I wrote years ago during the divorce proceedings. She had used it as proof that I didn't care about them, selecting phrases out of context to suit her narrative. Carl was angry, but more than that, he was hurt. He asked me why she would do something like that, why she couldn't just talk to him instead of trying to manipulate him. I didn't have a simple answer for him. All I could do was remind him that the truth will always come out, no matter how hard someone tries to distort it. Sia was also starting to ask deeper questions. She wanted to know if her mother had always been like that, if she had ignored signs during the marriage. It was difficult to navigate these conversations without letting my own resentment seep in. I told her that people can change, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, and that the important thing now was to focus on the present. As the children became more distant from their mother, her behavior became increasingly unpredictable. She began to show up at my house unannounced, demanding to speak to the children. I never let her in, but these confrontations were exhausting. One day she accused me of trying to take the children away from her completely. I assured her that this was not true, that all I wanted was for them to have a healthy relationship with both parents. She didn't believe me. The situation reached a critical point when Carl flatly refused to return to his mother's house. He said he didn't feel safe there, that he no longer trusted her. Sia agreed with his decision. I didn't force them to go. I told them they had the right to make their own decisions, and that their feelings were important. But I also knew that this situation was not sustainable in the long term. Something had to change. In the midst of all this chaos, I found myself having to explain the situation to relatives who were starting to take sides. My parents were supportive, but they were concerned about the impact this was having on the children. My ex-wife's family, on the other hand, began to detect inconsistencies in her version of events. Her sister, who had always been extremely loyal to her, called me one night. She told me that she no longer knew what to believe, that the children's behavior did not match the story her sister had been telling. She asked me to find out the truth, and for the first time I felt that someone on her side was finally willing to listen. So I told her everything. I could hear the disbelief in her voice. She said she had no idea the situation was so serious and that she felt ashamed for having believed her sister without questioning her. The truth was starting to reach the important people, and I could only hope it would bring some clarity to all this confusion. Throughout this whole process, my main concern was still Carl and Sia. Their world had been turned upside down and I was very worried about them. As the situation with my ex-wife continued to unfold, I knew it was only a matter of time before her family became more directly involved. While her sister had shown signs of understanding the truth, her father was a completely different case. My ex-father-in-law Charles had always been a proud and intimidating man, quick to judge and fiercely protective of the family reputation. He had been one of the strongest voices supporting his daughter's claims and had not hesitated to present me as the villain of the story. So when Charles unexpectedly showed up at my house one Saturday afternoon, I wasn't too surprised. Carl and Sia had gone out with friends. I was alone at home when I opened the door and found him standing there, arms crossed and frown on his face. Charles didn't waste time with formalities, launching straight into accusations. He claimed that I had manipulated his grandchildren and was destroying his daughter's life. He accused me of turning everyone against him and of doing it out of revenge after the divorce. I invited him in not because I wanted to, but because I thought it would be better to have this conversation in private rather than on my doorstep. When he came in, his posture became even more tense and he made it clear that he wasn't there to talk, but to lecture me. He started talking about loyalty, about how families should stick together no matter what. He claimed that my actions were destroying his daughter and, by extension, his whole family. I let him vent for a while, watching his face redden with each word. When he finally paused, I told him that I understood his frustration, but that there were clearly things he didn't know or didn't want to acknowledge. That comment only seemed to fuel his anger. He claimed that I had no right to judge his daughter, that I had abandoned her and the children, and now I was trying to rewrite history to make myself look better. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to set the record straight. I told Charles that I had not abandoned anyone, least of all my children. I explained that it was his daughter who decided to have an affair, not me. That made him stop for a moment, although he quickly recovered, saying that he had no proof and that my accusations were baseless. It was then that I decided to reveal the whole truth to him. I told him that I knew who the other person involved in the infidelity was and that it was not just any stranger, but someone close to his family. Someone they trusted. I saw the confusion on his face before I said the name, Matthew. Charles's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face went pale and his mouth opened as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Matthew was his son's best friend, practically part of his family. The idea that his daughter had been involved with him clearly shocked him. I explained that although I had no physical evidence, Matthew had practically confessed to me during a confrontation years ago. The divorce was really complicated. I still remember the arrogant expression on his face when he told me that I wasn't enough for my wife, that she deserved someone who could make her happy. Charles tried to dismiss it at first, calling it mere speculation, but I could see doubt beginning to creep into his expression. I suggested that he ask his daughter directly if she didn't believe me, although I warned him that he might not like the answer he got. He remained silent for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded lower, almost trembling. He asked me why I hadn't said anything before, why I hadn't revealed this during the divorce. I explained that my priority back then had been to protect Carl and Sia. I didn't want to expose them to such a painful situation, and I certainly didn't want them to see their mother in such a negative light. But now things were different. She was using the children as pawns in her game, and I wasn't going to stand by and let that happen. The children were old enough to know the truth. Charles seemed to struggle with this information. He muttered something about needing time to process it all and then turned to leave. But before he got to the door, he stopped and looked at me. He said that if what I was saying was true, it would change everything. A few days later, I learned from his sister that Charles had apparently confronted his daughter about Matthew and, although she did not flatly deny it, her reaction was revealing. She had exploded, accusing him of taking my side and trying to undermine her. It wasn't long before the rest of the family began to distance themselves. His sister, who had already been skeptical, became more vocal about her doubts. Even his mother, who had always been his main support, seemed to be taking a step back. My ex-wife, of course, did not take this situation well. She redoubled her accusations, claiming that I was trying to isolate her and ruin her life. But the more she lashed out at everyone, the more people began to see through her lies. The children were also starting to notice the tension. Carl asked me if something had happened between Granddad and his mother, and I told him that they were having a disagreement, but that it wasn't a burden they should carry. As the weeks passed, the consequences became more apparent. Matthew, who had been a frequent presence at family gatherings, suddenly disappeared from the picture. My ex-wife's family stopped inviting her to events so often, and when they did, It was clear that their patience was wearing thin. Update 3. After everything that had happened, the children made it clear that they wanted to stay with me for an extended period. They didn't share many details about what happened when they were with their mother. But the few things they mentioned, arguments, emotional blackmail and constant accusations towards me and them for supposedly abandoning her, made it clear that staying there was not healthy for them. When Carl finally asked if he and Sia could move in with me permanently, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I made it clear to them that they could always see their mother whenever they wanted, but neither of them seemed interested in seeking that contact for the time being. Their choice was not so much a rejection of their mother as a need for stability and tranquility, something they hadn't had for a long time. This decision, however, brought with it new challenges. My current house, although comfortable for 1 adult and 2 children part-time, was not spacious enough for 3 permanent residents, especially as they grew older and needed more privacy. It was time to look for a bigger house, a place where we could really settle down and start over. The story of my ex-wife's infidelity and its consequences had become a recurring topic among friends and colleagues. Many people criticized me for not having exposed her infidelity earlier. Some argued that I should have proclaimed the truth from the rooftops as soon as I found out. I understood their frustration, I really did. There were days when I wanted to do exactly that, but at the time I decided to focus on minimizing the damage for Carl and Sia. I was dealing with my own broken heart and humiliation, and I didn't want to drag my children through a painful public spectacle. When people told me I should have revealed the truth years ago, I calmly explained my point of view. My silence was not to protect my ex-wife, but to protect my children. I wanted to keep them as far away from the chaos as possible. I was confident that the truth would come out eventually, and when it did, it would be on my terms in a way that minimized collateral damage. Looking back, I still stand by that decision. Yes, it allowed my ex to spread his version of events for a while, but the alternative would have been worse for Carl and Sia. By waiting until the right moment, I was able to expose the truth in an undeniable way, without turning it into a public spectacle that would have shamed my children even more. With that weight off my shoulders, I turned my attention to the future. After a couple of months of searching, I found the perfect house, a spacious, modern home with enough room for us all to have our own space. Carl and Sia were thrilled when I showed it to them. Sia loved the fact that she would finally have a bigger room to decorate as she liked, and Carl was excited about the large backyard, which was perfect for playing football. The move itself was chaotic, as all moves tend to be. But there was a feeling of excitement and hope that made all the effort worthwhile. As we unpacked boxes and assembled furniture, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was our new beginning, a place where we could leave the past behind and focus on building something better. Of course, not everyone was happy about the move. My ex-wife was furious when she found out that the kids were moving in with me permanently. She even tried to make them feel guilty about it, calling them ungrateful and accusing them of abandoning her. But Carl and Sia stood their ground. They told her that they needed space, that they were tired of the constant drama and just wanted to concentrate on being normal teenagers. Listening to them stand up for themselves was a bittersweet experience. It pained me to see how much they had had to mature because of this whole situation, but at the same time I was proud of their strength and maturity. Carl stepped up and kept my ex-wife at bay. She couldn't impose her will on him. As we settled into our new home, I made it a priority to create an environment of normality for the children. I wanted them to feel safe and protected, to know that this was a place where they could really relax and be themselves. We established new routines, family dinners, board game nights, and weekend outings. One night, as we were unpacking the last boxes, Carl asked me if I regretted not having revealed his mother's infidelity sooner. His question took me by surprise, but I knew it deserved a sincere answer. I confessed that although there had been times when I wished I had spoken up earlier, I did not regret the way I had handled the situation. Sia intervened to say that she was glad I had waited to tell them. She explained that it would have been too difficult for them to take in when they were younger, but now it all made sense. Hearing that from her felt like validation. As if maybe I hadn't made as many mistakes as I sometimes feared.